You know, for centuries, the question of what happens after we die has been left to philosophy and faith. But what if we could approach it with science? Today, we're exploring a fascinating new framework that doesn't just ask the question, but proposes a way to actually test for an answer. To get there, though, we need to start with an even bigger idea, a really big one. Is it possible there's a single, universal pattern that governs everything in reality? I mean, a fundamental rhythm that dictates how all things, from stars to cells, change and evolve. So just imagine for a second, a single pattern that describes the very expansion of the universe, something that governs how all that energy and geometry unfolds across cosmic time. Now bring that way, way down and imagine that same exact pattern also describes something much smaller, like the rhythmic division of our own cells, where DNA is constantly replicating and repairing itself to keep life going. And what if that exact same pattern even structures our own consciousness? What if it suggests that intelligence isn't some random accident, but an inevitable outcome of this universal harmony? Well, that radical idea is at the very heart of what we're talking about today. So this isn't just a cool thought experiment. It's been formalized in a theory called Triune Harmonic Dynamics, or THD for short, developed by researcher Kevin L. Brown. And what it proposes is that every single transformation in the universe, big or small, follows this fundamental 3-6-9 rhythm. All right, so how does this universal rhythm actually work? You might be surprised. It's actually a really simple and elegant three-step cycle. So it all kicks off with emergence, where a new state is born. Then comes contrast, which is a period of tension and challenge that really tests this new state. And finally, you get integration, where all that conflict resolves and the elements combine into a new, more complex order. And then, the whole cycle begins again, just on a higher level. And here's what makes this so compelling. It's not just a nice idea, it's actually grounded in mathematics. This equation you're looking at is proposed as a kind of universal map for transformation. It's basically a formula designed to describe that three-step process of change, whether you're talking about atoms or entire galaxies. Okay, so a universal law, our own personal identity, how in the world do we get from one to the other? Let's make that connection right now. Within this framework, your identity isn't some kind of mysterious spirit or ghost. Instead, it's defined as a highly organized, totally measurable pattern of information, a unique signature that's encoded in the neural pathways and electromagnetic fields of your brain and body. And that brings us right back to our central question. If your identity is a highly organized informational pattern, what happens to that pattern when its biological container, the body, starts to fail? This leads us straight to the core hypothesis. The theory frames the end of life not as some unanswerable mystery, but as a structural problem, one that we can actually analyze and test. The key idea here is something called structural pressure. Think of it like this. As a biological system, our body, gets closer to death, instability and disorder naturally increase. This pressure just keeps building until the system reaches a critical tipping point. It's kind of like water reaching its boiling point. So once it hits that tipping point, the theory says there are only two possible outcomes. The first one, complete decay. The informational pattern that is you just dissolves into random environmental noise. Gone. But the second outcome is a residual structure. The pattern holds on, at least for a little while, leaving behind a detectable signal, basically an informational echo of what was once there. But here's the kicker. And this is what makes it real science. You can't just go looking for proof that you're right. You have to define exactly what would prove your idea is wrong. You see, the power of any scientific hypothesis is that it has to be falsifiable. There's got to be a clear way to prove it false. So this whole framework isn't about proving an afterlife. It's about setting up an experiment that could definitively rule one out. And this slide lays it out clear as day. The hypothesis of an echo is proven false if the signals we measure are just random environmental noise. It's proven false if, and you can see this in the third point, there's zero correlation with the person's unique, pre-recorded identity signature. Bottom line, if we listen for a signal and all we hear is static, the hypothesis is toast, disproven. So, okay, why does all of this matter? Because get this, whether the hypothesis is ultimately proven right or wrong, just the pursuit of an answer could have some pretty profound implications. I mean, just think about it. Simply designing this experiment could lead to huge breakthroughs in ultra-sensitive electromagnetic detection or way better end-of-life monitoring systems. It forces us to see death not as a single moment, but as a complex process we can actually study. And this whole framework for analyzing system collapse, you could apply that to other complex systems, from the stability of an AI to the behavior of financial markets. This quote from the source material really just hits the nail on the head. The goal isn't to assume that identity persists. The goal is to define the exact measurable conditions to either detect it or rule it out for good. It takes a philosophical question and turns it into a testable structural problem. So, whether our identity is a pattern that just fades to static or an echo that briefly lingers, this framework suggests that for the first time in history, we might have the scientific tools to actually listen for an answer. And it leaves all of us with one final profound question. What is the ultimate fate of our information?